All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Next Level by Association. And, you know, this is a gentleman today that I'm going to bring to you is a guy that I met originally. Well, I heard about him many years ago, probably 2009, 2008. Started following some of his travels and some of the lessons that he teaches. And then I got a chance to meet him at Jim Rohn's memorial. And I remember I met him and Kyle Wilson at the same time, and got a chance to just connect briefly there. Obviously, it was a memorial, but then we stayed in touch online. And over the course of the last several years, we've connected a few times. And then I was going to Scottsdale, so I said, "Hey, I know you're in Scottsdale. Can we grab coffee?" So we did. We had a great time of just connecting and kind of learning more about each other and stuff. But I tell you, one of the things I've always been impressed by Chris Widener is his commitment to learning and his commitment to always being better. I've seen it over and over again. I've seen it by the people he hangs out with, but I've also seen it by the way that he goes about learning and growing. So, Chris Widener, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Chris, you know, you've been around some of the best of the best of the best in the personal development industry. I mean, you've personally been mentored by people like Jim Rohn and like Zig Ziglar and some of these amazing, great people. But yet you've always been in this place where you've constantly challenged yourself to grow. And I think, you know, especially today, we see a lot of people going, I got it. I know personal development. I know negotiation. I know, but then they stop.
Yeah.
What's been the thing that's kept you driving and moving towards another goal?
I think, it probably comes down to my ambition, I would imagine. It's ambition that desires more. And in order to get more, you have to become more. Jim Rohn used to teach that in order for things to get better, you have to get better. And so, wherever we find ourselves, whether it's physically or emotionally or financially or relationally or whatever, if you want it to be better, you have to work at becoming better. And so I think that's probably what really drives it is what I want to achieve out of life requires me to do better and to get better.
Love that. It's a great answer. I think that if we believed that internally, if more people believe that internally, that would drive them as well to be better. I know of a story about when you were about 9 years old and you were sent to live with an aunt and uncle.
Yeah, my Aunt Rochelle and my Uncle Paul.
And your description of them was hilarious. The first time I listened to it, I heard, can you kind of describe who your mom
Sure.
was?
Yeah, my dad died when I was 4, so my mom and I was a real handful growing up. So in the 4th grade, my mom decided to send me off to live with my Aunt Rochelle and my Uncle Paul. And my Uncle Paul, my middle name is Paul. I was named after Christopher Robin from Winnie the Pooh and my Uncle Paul. And so they shipped me off to live with my Aunt Rochelle, my Uncle Paul. I guess the idea was to whip me into shape, emphasis on the whip. My Uncle Paul was a log truck driver, and he was about, 6 foot tall, big burly guy, big bushy beard, wore the jeans, just everything just looked like he came straight out of the woods, missing half his teeth. He had big stretch suspenders. He weighed like 250 pounds. And then my Aunt Rochelle was a school bus driver. And her nickname was Sarge. In fact, still to this day, 40 years later, if I bump into somebody that lived in that town where she was a school bus driver, Falls City, Washington, and I'll say, "Oh, you must have been on my aunt's bus." And they're like, "Well, who's your aunt?" And I say, "Rochelle." And they're like, "No, that wasn't our bus driver." I go, "Oh yeah, Sarge." And they go, "Yeah, Sarge, we know Sarge." So everybody knew Sarge. But I lasted there about 18 months. I was supposed to stay 2 years there, but I don't even think they could handle me very much. They shipped me back to live with my mom. So,
Oh man, I love the way you share that story about your mom saying, how long are you saying, how long are we going to stay? And she says, I'm going to stay a couple hours.
well, I'll tell you an interesting thing. My Uncle Paul, they got divorced shortly after that, and I never saw him, but I saw my cousins, so I kept up with what my uncle was doing with his life. And I don't know when it was, 10 years ago, 12 years ago or so, I get a phone call from my cousin. And she said, my dad is on his deathbed and he maybe only has a day or two left. Will you come and see him? He'd like you to see him. And so, I hadn't seen him since I was a little boy, and he was a big, burly, um, log truck driver,
Yeah.
logger. And now I was an adult. And when I walked in, he had no hair. His hair was gone. All of his teeth were gone. He was, he used to weigh like 250 pounds. Now he weighed like 150 pounds. And, and he apologized to me for all the beatings. I mean, I was physically abused a lot growing up, and both by my mother as well as my Aunt Rochelle and Uncle Paul. And he apologized to me on his deathbed, asked me if I would forgive him. And I said, absolutely, sure, no problem. And as I walked back out to my car that day, I remember thinking that was more for him than it was for me, because I had already really kind of dealt with it and addressed it and forgiven him and moved on with my life. But he needed to make those reconciliations, and tie those things up. It was a really interesting interaction. I mean, I hadn't seen the guy in 30 or 40 years.
Wow, man, that's an amazing story, because I love the fact that you said it was more for him than for you.
Yeah.
You had already handled that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people right now, especially with, with loss of jobs, loss of incomes, loss of relationships, everything else, that are really struggling on how to do that, how to handle it themselves. Because, I've done this with people where I've apologized on behalf of their abusive father, or apologized on behalf of, and just said, you may never, ever hear this from their lips, but I
Yeah.
want you to at least hear it from mine on behalf of them.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to watch the floodgates open. But how do you encourage people to deal with some of their past, some of their stuff? I mean, you've had some stuff in your life. How have you dealt with it? And then how do you encourage people to deal with it themselves so that they can get to where you're at today?
I think the first key is self-awareness. You have to know. You have to know what has happened in order to deal with what has happened. In fact, when Denise and I were going to get married, we were writing a book. It was called Better the Second Time. We wrote it while we were preparing to get married. And people think, well, you haven't been married that long. How can you write a book? And I said, we always tell people, no, it was about what we wanted our second marriage and the principles we knew we had to carry into it. And the first chapter is don't make the same mistake twice. Now, most people think that means don't pick a bad person again. That's not what this means at all. This chapter, don't make the same mistake twice, means don't bring your crap into another marriage. And so I really wanted to look at it because, if you ask the average divorced woman, why'd you get divorced? Well, my husband was a jerk. You ask the average divorced guy, why'd he get divorced? He'd say, well, my wife was a real witch and, couldn't get along with it. It's always the other person's fault.
Yeah.
But when we step back from it, or when we're talking about another situation, we realize that it's never just one person's fault. So we decided, what are we going to do to prepare ourselves? Well, the first thing you do if you're going to deal with something, you have to know what it is to deal with. So I actually texted my ex-wife and I said, what were 2 or 3 things that I contributed mostly to the demise of our marriage? And she texted me 3 things back. And so I texted her back. I said, thank you very much. At which point she texted me 3 more. So at that point I said, okay, time out. Just let me work on these. But but the reality is you have to be self-aware of what happened. And sometimes when people have traumatic things, even like sexual assault, from a family member or something, those things get repressed and they don't even know them. They get driven. The brain, in order to just to cope, will shove them down deep. But I think being aware of what has happened, whose roles were involved, what your complicity was, all of those kinds of things, because you can't deal with it until you know what it is. So I think self-awareness is just, maybe you have a string of broken relationships, going back and looking and saying, okay, was it my fault?
Right.
What do I need to own? Because you can't own other people's stuff for them. You can only own your own stuff. One of my favorite passages from the Bible says, as much as it's up to you, live at peace with everyone. And that's really good because it tells you the goal. The goal is peace with everyone, but it also tells you that you can't own everybody else. You can only own yours.
Right.
As much as it's up to you, live at peace with everyone. So I think, it's one of the reasons I think why in the 12 steps with Alcoholics Anonymous, I think it's one of the first things you have to go do. I've not been through it, but you have to go and make reconciliation and apologize to people who you've done wrong to. And you can't do that unless you take a good long look and are honest with yourself. So I think being transparent, being authentic, I think being willing to allow yourself to put yourself out there and potentially get hurt or rejected or any of those things. But then that falls back into, as much as it's up to you, live at peace with everyone. So just taking a good long look at your life and then saying, what do I need to do to make this, make this right?
Yeah, well, those are great points. And man, I definitely agree. And I love I remember watching you as you were going through your divorce
Yeah.
online, had met you only, but online watching you and, watching that journey and how transparent you were. And I remember having so much respect for your being willing to share what was going on in your life. I mean, here you're this amazing motivational speaker, Hall of Fame, all of this stuff. You have influenced thousands upon thousands of people over the course of your life. You've been surrounded by some of the best of the best of the best. And now you're considered one of the best of the best. And yet you're going through this struggle and you're sharing it online. And I remember thinking that takes a lot. And
well, transparency. I remember I had a pastor once tell me, he said, pastors should never share any of their failings with their congregation. They should never admit wrong. They should never, and his theory was we need to be inspiring to people, show them what they can. But then my pushback to him was, and this is my philosophy, is no, I mean, obviously you can overshare, right? A pastor shouldn't overshare. But I think that whether it's a congregation looking at their pastor or it's a self-help audience looking at the speaker, I believe that it's the transparency and the hurts and the pains and the challenges and the obstacles we go through that actually inspire. I think it's more true that they go, oh, wow, that guy's a best-selling author, but he has problems just like me. So maybe I can get through my things too. And so I just am a big believer in transparency. I know you can overshare at times, but I just have always felt like it's important to be honest and to be real. And it's funny, Bob, Denise and I were at an event this last weekend, and I bumped into a woman that I've been friends with on Facebook for like 11 years. And like in 11 years, we've interacted maybe twice. And she's in the same sort of industry, but I had, in fact, when I first saw her, I didn't even really remember her first name. And then I put two and two together. I remembered who she was. I said, Denise, I said, I think I know that lady. So Denise got up to go to the restroom. And then like 3 minutes later, that lady got up, she started walking out. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go out there. I'll catch her. I'll say hi. And then Denise will see her. So I walked up to her and I said, I held up my name tag. I said, hey, remember me? And she said, oh my gosh, Chris. She gave me a big hug, literally gave me a big hug and kind of pulled me back and looked at me and said, where's your beautiful wife? Well, at that point, Denise had been coming up behind her. So I just reached around her and I spun her around and said, there she is. And this woman, I mean, really had only talked to me twice in 11 years, had never met or seen or talked to Denise. And she just sort of like you were saying, she came up and she said, I have watched what Chris has gone through and I've watched you come into his life. And it made me realize how many people actually watch what you're doing on Facebook, even if they're not necessarily interacting or whatever. But it was interesting, and it was good to know that sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly really does help other people.
Right. Well, I mean, you think about the most inspirational movies, right? They don't start out with the guy on top, staying on top, always, and finishing on top.
Right.
Yeah, never happens. That's not inspirational. So I appreciate you, but I've always appreciated you sharing your life in that way.
You.
You've influenced so many people from the stage, and I think originally I may have seen you on Elevation. Were you on Elevation?
No,
Okay.
TSTN. I had that TV show on TSTN with Zig, and then I had my own.
That was it. Yeah. That was it. Yeah. And I've always loved the interaction with the audience. You've always approached it from a conversation basis versus just just a statement. It's always just been a conversation. Really appreciate that about you. What are some of the things you've learned in the last 5 years, say, that have really changed your life? Because you'd learned so much before that, and sometimes we just keep relearning those things. But I think you've really picked up on some new things that have changed your life in the last 5 years or so. What are some of those things?
Well, first of all, I'll go back to the conversational thing. I was asked by a couple of speakers who put on a Become a Speaker event. They asked me to come out and give a speech. And I said, sure. So I did. I didn't know that they had plans for that speech, though. As soon as I was done, one of the people came out on stage and said, okay, we're going to just stay out here for a minute. We're going to do some audience stuff. And the first question was, how would you describe Chris's style?
Hmm.
And they all described it as conversational, as opposed to preaching or this unidirectional. It was sort of conversational, bidirectional, um, and that's purposeful. I try to get people to think, and I ask a lot of questions that lead them to the answer in their own head and such. But the things that I learned a really interesting thing last year, actually.
What's that?
Um, I learned about myself, and I just turned 55 a few weeks ago. So it's interesting that even at 55, I'm learning these things. I learned that I have two very conflicting personality traits. And one of my personality traits is I want to be liked. My other personality trait that conflicts quite a bit with wanting to be liked is I can't keep my opinions to myself. So, I really, I mean, it was a profound thing.
Yeah.
And I always state my opinions. Anybody that knows me or follows me online knows that I have strong political opinions and life opinions and all those kinds of things. But I didn't like it when people didn't like me.
Hmm.
And I felt conflicted about that, and even hurt and wounded. But one of my closest friends last year went off the crazy train and just, I think it was over my position on masks or something. I mean, it was one of my closest friends, and
Wow.
literally wrote me an email and said, "Don't ever contact me again." I'm like, what? This is weird. So it was just a really weird interaction. But I remember thinking, if you can lose one of your closest friends over an opinion about what's going on in the whole COVID thing and all the turmoil we had last year and the elections and stuff. Um, and I didn't even really disagree with him that much. I actually kind of conceded a few things to him, but in the middle of it, bam, don't ever contact me again. I don't want to have anything to do with you. You're a terrible person. And I just realized, if you can lose your best friend, then
Hmm.
why would I worry about anybody? Like, I
Yeah.
just wouldn't worry about anybody. And it was,
That's
in a
great.
way, it hurt, but in a way, it was one of the most freeing things that ever happened to me.
Wow.
It was almost like the coup de grace in regard to my desire to be liked by people, because I
Hmm.
just thought the futility of it. You know, people who don't like you nearly as much as your closest friends, they're gonna, you know, write you off for a lot less than that.
Right.
So it was actually really good for me, and I think it actually made me more effective in regard to the things that I talk about, was not caring what other people believed about me or
Ooh,
thought about me.
what? And that's a tough one, and especially in the political climate, or especially in the mask wearing climate, or anything,
Yeah.
right? I mean, but it just goes to show that if somebody doesn't like you for one thing, um, they might not like you for something else.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of one of those things where I've kind of come to that conclusion. But it wasn't as big of an epiphany for me that, yes, I want to be liked too, just like most everyone wants to be
Most
liked.
everybody does.
But how do you reconcile that with the overwhelming desire to share your opinion and express your opinion? um I mean, it's mind-boggling to watch how people will drop a friendship over something like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I tell people all the time, I'll disagree with you. Like, I'll bang the table. I am right. No way. Come on, you're wrong. You haven't thought this through. And as soon as the debate is over, let's go grab dinner and I'll buy you dinner and a beer.
Yeah.
For some people, it's almost like politics is religion for them.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you disagree with their religion, then all of a sudden they cut you out of their life. And that's just never been me.
Yeah.
In fact, I had a couple people last year who I literally, two people specifically, I said, please stop bringing this up to me. Now, you got to understand, those of you listening, you've not met a more political person than me. I ran for the US Senate. I've counseled people running from president on down to governor, senator, congressman, all the way down to city council. And yet, when it comes to destroying a relationship, it's not that important to me. Politics isn't.
Mhm.
So two people very specifically, I said, please stop bringing this up. I understand you believe differently than me. I believe differently than you. I can respect you hold a different opinion than I do. And I would hope that you would, we've beat this dog to death. There's nothing
Yeah.
else to talk about. Let's just drop it. And I told him, I told one of them very specifically, you will kill our friendship if you continue to talk about this. And he just would not let it go. And then I just blocked him. I was like, I did everything I could, basically begged him saying, I like you personally.
Yeah.
And I don't care that you believe differently than me politically. Let's just drop it. And couldn't be done. Some people just have to keep pushing. But
So true.
yeah.
So true. You know, in one of your talks, you talk about, well, in a lot of your talks, you talk about integrity. But I love the way you talk about integrity, because you talk about it being kind of a foundational thing for everything else. Any type of the relationship, integrity is going to have to be somewhere in that foundation. Can you kind of talk a little bit about integrity for the audience here? Because some will be watching live, some will be watching recorded. But you know, your thoughts on integrity.
Yeah, I do think it's the number one. In fact, in my book, Art of Influence, it's the first, the first lesson. In my audio program, which is 12 lessons instead of the 4 in the book, it's the first one there as well. And I always tell people that the number one is always the number one, and everything else you can kind of put in whatever order you want. But integrity has to be the foundation of it. And about 20 years ago, and I really wish I could figure out where I learned this, because I've been talking about the guy for years and I've never been able to give him credit. But I read in a book where he talked about how the root word of integrity shares the same root word as the old math term integer.
Mm.
And an integer is a whole number. So the very root definition of integrity means whole
Mm.
or complete or undivided, which means that you operate out of a single set of morals, ethics, and values, not a dual set or a triple set of morals, ethics, and values. It means you don't treat one person one way, you treat another person another way. It means you don't, record some of your income for taxes and then hide some of your income for taxes. It means you operate out of a single set of morals, ethics, and values. And I just love that definition. It means you're not divided. It means you don't tell the truth sometimes and then you lie sometimes, because by its very definition, as soon as you operate out of a two dual nature of morals, ethics, and values, you no longer, by definition, are whole. And so you therefore no longer have integrity.
Wow.
And I just love that definition because it just makes it really simple, and it's just a really great way of unwrapping that concept.
So what do you say to somebody, because, you know, there's people that have broken their integrity. We all have in one level or another, right? At one point or another. What do you say to somebody who's broken their integrity? Maybe in their relationship with their spouse, or maybe in their relationship with their kids, or maybe in a business dealing or whatever. What do you say to that person? How do they reconcile and get back on track?
Well, they have to reintegrate. You can gain integrity back by reintegrating, right? You bring yourself back into the whole. So imagine that maybe you have a telephone pole or something and a chunk of wood comes off and falls off. Now it's two pieces. It's the telephone pole, and it's the little piece. There's not integrity there, full integrity, because now it's divided. But you can put that piece back in there. You can graft it, you can nail it, you can glue it, you can whatever. I mean, there'll still be a crack there. So the analogy isn't perfect per se, but you can bring yourself back into integrity. Let's say that you lied to somebody. If you lie to somebody and you're being convicted of it, your conscience is convicting you of it, or it's caused a problem, you need to go and address it and say, I lied to you. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to lie to you, or in retrospect, I know I shouldn't have lied to you. Maybe you did mean to lie to the person the first time. But you have to own it, you have to reconcile it, and you have to bring yourself back into integrity. And that's the great thing about when I talk about it with leadership, right? People are like, well, everybody makes mistakes. Does that mean that this person can't lead anymore when they made a mistake? No, it doesn't at all. People expect leaders to make mistakes, because we all do, but they also expect the true leader to admit it and own it and correct it. If you're a leader who will never own his or her mistakes and continue to perpetuate them upon your staff or your employees or your followers or whatever, then they're going to lose trust, and they're not going to believe that you have integrity anymore. So integrity isn't being perfect. Integrity is about constantly bringing yourself back into integrity when we make mistakes. So let's say you chew an employee out at work, and you're mean to them or something, and other people saw. Next Monday, when you have your staff meeting, you need to own that in front of your staff and say, hey, before we get started, a few of you probably saw the way that I treated Joe last week. And I just have to tell you, first and foremost, Joe, I really, really am sorry. I'm deeply apologize. That was inappropriate for me as the leader of this company to speak to you that way. And I want you to know that it won't happen again.
Mm.
So what does that say to the rest of the team? rest of the team. See, the rest of the team prior to that wasn't trusting you anymore because they're like, man, if he'll yell at Joe, maybe he'll yell at me. You've created a hostile work environment. But when you apologize to Joe in front of the rest of the team, now they go, oh, okay, he gets it. It was just a mistake. We're cool. And they come back together again. So it's always about owning it and being transparent and authentic about it.
Wow. That's a powerful one. And one of the other things I heard you talk about, hunting versus fishing.
Mm.
And I loved the way you described that. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit? It was brilliant.
Yeah, in sales, Jesus said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And I always thought that was funny. And I always use the analogy when I'm talking. And wouldn't it have been interesting if he'd have said, follow me, I'll make you hunters of men. And so why did he say fishers of men? Well, first of all, the two guys he was talking to were fishermen, so it made sense to them. But I also think there's something interesting about hunting and fishing. When you're in sales, too many people are hunters. Or even if you're a guy and you're trying to find a girlfriend, too many of you are hunters. And they're just like, get away from me, creepy guy, back off. It was a little too aggressive. You just need to back off for a minute. But animals don't like to be hunted. And when an animal recognizes it's being hunted, what does it do? It runs. And it runs because it knows it's going to die if it doesn't run. Right. So fishing is an interesting thing. Fishing, the animal comes right to you. The animal doesn't run away. It comes to you. And the reason why is because you offer it bait. It's attractive. It's passive in a way. Now, I know some fishermen would say it's not really passive, and I get it if you're fly fishing or whatever. But the analogy for the most part is attract the animal to you instead of hunt the animal down and go get it. Right. And, sometimes I'll talk to people in network marketing or whatever. And I'm like, sometimes you go after these people so hard to join your team, and then they join your team. And 6 weeks later, you're like, why won't they do anything? I'll tell you why they won't do anything. They're dead. You killed them. You grabbed their dead hand and you put a pen in it. You signed their name, wrote their check, gave them your $99. Now you're part of the team, but they didn't want to be part of your team anyway. You hunted them down and killed them, and they finally just signed the paperwork just to get you to leave them alone. It's worth $99 for you to quit calling me and ask me to join your team anymore. So now people don't like to be hunted. They like to be, and well, then sometimes one guy said to me, yeah, but Chris, your analogy breaks down. He says, because in both instances, the animal still dies. And I said, well, no, not necessarily. See, in fishing, we have catch and release. Right. I've never heard of shoot and release.
Nope.
Right. You don't hunt them down, kill them and release. You can catch and release.
So true. So true. Chris, as we're getting ready to wrap this up, and we'll open up a couple of questions. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and raise them or write in them. If you're watching recorded, type them in. But what's next for Chris Widener? I mean, you've got this beautiful wife now. You've got this amazing life that you're leading. We sat out for a couple hours and had coffee out on the patio at a local Starbucks, and it just came to me that you were really at peace with things, and things seem to be moving really well.
Very much so.
What's next?
Well, so I've had 3 very successful careers in my life. I was a pastor for 14 years, from 1988 till 2002. I built a huge youth ministry out in northern New Jersey. Then I moved to Seattle and started 3 churches. 2 of those churches are still going, and they have probably 1,500 people on Sunday mornings between the 2 of them. And then I was also in politics. I own a very fast-growing political website. I do coaching for people running for office. I ran for office myself. I built a huge website back in 2015. I sold it in the run-up to the election. I was getting 20 million page views a month. Sold that to a media company who wanted my 1 million person Facebook page. So that's a successful career. My speaking career has been great. I've worked with some of the legends you mentioned, Jim Rohn, John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar. I've spoken to crowds of 25,000 people. I've written 22 books, including a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller. I'm in the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame. And so I've had 3 really great careers, and I'm going to continue to speak, and I'll write a book every couple of years and such. But Denise and I are getting into real estate. We're getting into the real estate business, and we're already talking to real estate agents about coming on our team. We're building all across the United States. It's a virtual it's a virtual company, and so you can sell anywhere. People can be on the team from anywhere, and we're actually in 15 countries and opening 3 more every quarter. So Denise has a long history in real estate here in Scottsdale, and I have a long history in sales and leading teams and things like that. So we're super excited about it. It's a lot of fun.
That is very exciting.
Yeah.
Your books have really, so many people's lives have been changed by those books, and you've written, how many would you say, 22?
22. So not all of them are still in print. Some of my earlier books are out of print, but yeah, I think there's probably still like 15 or 16, and that's audiobook and Kindle
Awesome.
and all the different kinds of things.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
So I know Flo always has a question. So Flo, go ahead and bring yourself on. I know you're on your mobile, so you can't raise your hand or comment. There she is. She's helping her daughter move in Denver right now. So.
Oh, okay. Up in Colorado. Good.
What you were saying about integrity and everything, I don't have a question. It's just thank you for sharing. It was it was powerful to me what you said on integrity, and that it's not perfect, and that you can come back and reintegrate. And I love that. So thank you for sharing. So
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. I know a pastor friend of mine, and I'll keep the details as limited as possible, but he was one of the founders of one of the largest churches in the world, and he fell. He had some immorality, and it was on the front page above the fold of his city newspaper. And that happens a lot, and it's not surprising, right? Those kinds of things happen. But the thing that I loved most about what he did was he subjected himself to a 2-year restoration process. And he went to the leaders and said, I will do whatever you require of me to make sure that I get healthy again, and I do what's right, and I properly repent and bring myself back into alignment with my values. And he did it. And I think it actually stretched to 3 years. And at the end, they held a sort of a repositioning of him. He didn't go back into the ministry, but I really thought that was such a great example of what he was willing to do, to own his own bad stuff, and to bring himself back into alignment. When he brought himself back into alignment, people are forgiving. We're a forgiving people, right? And they said, okay, he dealt with it. He owned it. He's cleared those things out. He has people in his life who are, helping him get it straight. And I just think it's such a great example. And I think whether it's a big blow up that the whole public sees, or it's just simply something small that maybe only your spouse sees or your coworker sees, it's important for us to own that and bring ourselves back into alignment with integrity.
Wow. That is powerful.
I think, yeah, that's great. It's putting it back in. Like, how do you even know that you own it? Because sometimes you could still be in denial and not own.
Well, if you're still in denial, you're not going to be able to own it. You got to be, I mean, the hardest thing to say is I was wrong, or I did wrong, or, it's just hard, but you got to own it. I'm watching another public figure right now who, about 5 years ago had a big blow up, and he's got himself up and running again, and the whole thing's happening again. And I've reached out to a few of the real living legends in our industry, and people who are, above reproach, and said, hey, I'm more of a colleague of his, as opposed to someone who's, above and well respected in his world. But I reached out to a few of those people, and they're like, I've tried, and he's not listening to anybody. It's such a tragedy. And he's about to go down the drain for the second time. And it literally is just, he never figured out what happened the last time.
Wow.
That's hard.
It is.
Hard. But thank you.
But thank you for being there, Chris, for him to at least acknowledge him where he's at, and then try and get some help for him. So Pearl, you have a question or a comment?
I just wanted to commend Chris for showing up for your uncle. My son got called to his father's deathbed, and his father had some reconciliation to do and wasn't able to do it for himself, but it was for my son. So, just commend you for showing up for your uncle and not holding past experiences against him. And giving him the gift of being able to reconcile with you as he was
Yeah.
passing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think if you're humble enough to realize you make mistakes, then then that allows you to be able to go to the other people who made mistakes and forgive them quicker. I actually think that's one of the things that going through my divorce really made me a lot more compassionate and graceful. And because I had a lot of people, I was living in the Seattle area where I'd spent 50 years, and I'd run for office, and I was well known, and all my friends were the who's who of whatever. And so I lost a few friends over that because I didn't live up to their standard of what they thought I should do or how I should live, and those kinds of things. And I just remember thinking, I really want to become more graceful and loving and kind and forgiving through all of this. And it really, I think, is one of the benefits of going through that very, very hard thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love what you did. I love what you did going into your second marriage, is to not bring your old crap into your new. That's awesome.
You know what I thought? I figured if my first wife didn't like it, my second wife probably wouldn't like it either. So, I'm pretty good at deductive reasoning.
I literally wrote, what is the title of the book you wrote in the midst of that relationship?
It's called Better the Second Time.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah, Better the Second Time. And we actually we met online. We met on an app called Bumble. So we did an audio program called Swipe Right for Mr. and Mrs. Right, online dating for the 40 plus crowd.
Oh my goodness.
And it's on iTunes and all that. But well, because if you think about it, dating and, trying to find a spouse in your 40s or 50s is you're looking for something very differently than if you're in your 20s. In your 20s, you're looking for somebody who'll be a good husband or be a good father or a good mother, build, you make sure you want to build the same kind of business together or whatever. When you're in your 50s, you're looking for somebody to retire who enjoys the same similar, things and places you can travel and the same conversational kinds of things. So it was unique doing that audio program and talking about the uniqueness of doing this again in your 50s instead of your 20s.
That's awesome.
Well, Chris, I want to let you get out of here, and I really just appreciate the times that we've had together.
Yeah, me too.
Short ones, the long ones, the exchanges online, and thanks for showing up today and being here, because I know that the messages that you have are messages that everyone universally can apply to their lives and become better. What's the best way that you would like people to connect with you or stay connected? You're going to be a member of the Facebook group. You're going to get an invitation. Okay. So of Next Level by Association. So you'll be there. Gotcha. This will be recorded there as well. So people go back and watch it. They can exchange with you. But what's the best way that you like people to connect with you?
Yeah, sure. They can follow me on Facebook, Chris Widener Speaker, Instagram, Chris Widener Speaker, Twitter, just Chris Widener. They can email me. My personal email is widenergroup@gmail.com. Just don't sign me up to any newsletters, but you can email me if you want me to sign up to your newsletter. That's the only danger when I give out my email is people slap me on their email newsletters. But yes. No, if there's anything I can help you or whatever, that comes personally to me. Nobody else looks at it. So awesome. Happy to connect anybody.
Do you have any events or launches coming up that you want to share with people?
No, but I'll tell you what, if you know any realtors, send me their name or do an introduction. Send me and them an email and say, hey, I'll introduce you to Chris. He's got a really cool thing going on. The company's great. It's a revenue share. So the agents actually own the company. They own stock in the company. It's the first time it's ever been done in the history of the world, somebody designed a real estate company for the agents as opposed to for the owners and the market leaders and those kinds of things. So it's a pretty incredible opportunity for agents to not only do what they do selling real estate, but also have some ownership and build some revenue share and some ongoing income. So yeah, if you know anybody that way, shoot them over to me, widenergroup@gmail.com.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, sir. Get out there, have a great week, and just know how much I appreciate you. And I look forward to being back in Scottsdale soon and hanging out with you.
You too, Bob. Take care. Thanks.
All right.
See you, Flo. Bye.
Thank you, Grace and Bob.
Bye-bye. Thank you much.